and welcome to this edition of TraderTalk TV. And it's great to be back finally in the office here. We've got a physical TraderTalk TV, first one since COVID hit. And today we've got Tanya from Novatiq.
Yep.
Tanya, thanks for coming in today.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. Novatiq are an interesting company, and we are seeing a wave of really innovative companies here in Europe around ID and data. And Tanya's here today to talk about the company. But first we do that, we want to talk about the anonymous web. With the advent of GDPR and sort of privacy legislation, it's become important for publishers to sort of monetize their audiences using specific data points. And one of the areas they're looking at is the login, right? So obviously logins are important, but they only cover a small slither of the internet. I want to talk about the anonymous web because it's one of those areas that's been kind of ignored by a lot of people. So Tanya's here today to talk about, first of all, the opportunity for buyers and sellers in the new anonymous web, and also about the company Novatiq and how it works in the anonymous web. So Tanya, thanks for coming in today. Let's first talk about the anonymous web, right? Yep. Because it's an area that is sort of like ignored by a lot of people, or just pushed away because they don't want to think about it. But the opportunity is enormous, but also the pitfalls are enormous because we are ignoring a fairly sizable part of the internet.
Yep.
So talk to us about the opportunity. Let's map it out here. Let's talk about how publishers and buyers can make the most out of an anonymous web.
So in order for, in my opinion, for publishers and buyers to be able to make the most out of the anonymous web, they need to understand enough about the visitors to the anonymous web to be able to still apply the principles of the people-based marketing that most of the advertisers are looking for today. There's obviously also a lot of conversation around, could the approach to the anonymized web be made contextual only?
Yes.
But generally speaking, if you then take that out into the market and you speak to the advertisers, they still want to be able to reach the people that meet the profiles that they're looking for. Contextual doesn't always have every answer to the problem.
And we also have the measurement and attribution piece, because contextual is great, but how do you measure the effectiveness of that ad, reach and frequency, frequency capping, and sort of being able to kind of measure KPIs against the goals of the campaign.
That's right, and the reality is, for the most part, that can only be done with inside a walled garden, and that's if you rely on them being the judge and jury, telling you what you're reaching and then giving you the score to say, yes, this is what we reached.
And we can't let that happen, viewers, because Google and Facebook have enough money. So let's talk about how we can make this work for publishers, because it is obviously a huge issue for them. I remember talking to a publisher recently, and he's a senior person in the publisher, and he was talking about how he was going to ignore non-logged in users, like just basically he's going to push people towards logged in.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, that's interesting, but a lot of people won't log in, it won't happen.
Yeah.
So just talk about how he can sort of reap the benefits of that anonymous user, or those passerby users.
Yeah, so and actually I think it is really important that publishers do consider that they don't just try to drive everybody to log on.
Okay.
Because at the end of the day, I think that they would miss an opportunity if they did that. So they will always convert the people that will naturally choose to log on. They will then have the ability to reach them through their logged on authenticated ID infrastructure. They will probably convert a number of others that may not have done it, because they'll take them down a journey to say these are the benefits for you to log on. But I don't think we're going to get to the types of penetration 60-80% that's required to be able to truly reach the full equivalent of if they were able to reach the anonymized web of today. Okay.
And the ID, so the battle to be that universal ID, or to be that ID for the anonymous web, is pretty hot in Europe. Europe seems to be the hotbed of innovation at the minute. There's lots of companies that are trying to build capability and technology around this. Privacy first, I would say, as well, because it's interesting though. I'm kind of, before we sort of talk about your product and how you fit in, I'm interested to know what your opinion is around why this is happening. Do you think that GDPR and privacy and the sort of balkanization of data governance and legislation around data has sort of helped Europe to build this sort of like this area to help them build out these products?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I think basically that's galvanised the European companies even, into action, because ultimately they didn't have a choice, right? We saw the advent of GDPR when it first hit. The lead up to that was, oh, the data providers are going to disappear. There's no longer going to be any data. People-based marketing is going to be a thing of the past. It's going to be more and more difficult. Ultimately, there was a reduction in the amount of data providers, because when they looked under the tin, they weren't actually doing what was required to meet those requirements. And I think that started the journey of people then looking to, well, okay, in a privacy-first world, how can we still deliver the ability for advertisers and brands to reach the audiences they want to reach, but make sure that we do that within an environment that is privacy first for the consumer. And I think because we were forced down that path, because it was led through GDPR and the European Union, the companies based in Europe were looking very carefully at, okay, privacy first, data delivery, because we still need it to deliver people-based marketing, so that when the Safari and the Firefox dissipation of cookies started the parallel journey of, it's privacy first, and it needs to be data, and we need to do it with a different ID infrastructure, because we're already starting the journey of losing some of the IDs that are there, and we expect that to become to fruition across all of the browsers moving forward. We had all the component parts to say, right, these are the elements we need to look at. What can we do to overcome those issues as a combination? Whereas I think if you look at further afield in the US, they've looked more at things in isolation around, first of all, deciding whether they want to take a privacy first approach, but they've looked at, okay, cookies are disappearing, what can we do for that? And that
just use Chrome.
Started their journey late in the day. No, absolutely. So I think we've had all the constituent parts and we've overlaid them together. And as a group of European companies, I think we've been very proactive in looking at alternatives for the market as a whole.
Yeah, which is exciting. Yeah. So let's talk about Novatiq, right? It's a Welsh ad tech company. I didn't know that. Straight out of Wales, ladies and gentlemen. But you have a different approach. So let's just I'd love for you to map out how your product works, and relate it then into the anonymous web and how it can help the publishers and help advertisers.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So I'll do that. So first of all, I think it's important to note that the approach that we take is based on working with the telecommunications companies of the world, because we believe that obviously we all navigate to the web, we use our mobile phones, we use our broadband, we're all using a network. So why not use the very premise of the network, which by definition has to have an understanding of who you are, and therefore who you can be as far as a profile is concerned. Why not use that whole premise to create an ID currency that can be used for the anonymized web?
Okay.
Novatiq is all about working with the telcos in the world. So the first thing that we do is, and we use really forgive my awful drawing, but we use our synonymous snowflake. We call it a snowflake, by the way, because when we deliver an audience segment, it dissipates. So it's like a snowflake that disappears as it's coming down to the earth. Right? So that's why it's called a snowflake, just for everybody to know. So we basically take our technology and put software behind the telco network. So our system sits inside the telecommunications infrastructure behind their firewall. So that everything that we do in the firewall is controlled, it's safe, and managed within that space. It doesn't go outside of that environment unless it's now ready to be delivered as an element that goes out into the ecosystem. And the software is responsible for doing two main things. It directs incoming traffic from all the users of, and I'm a really bad drawer, of mobile phones or laptops or whatever the infrastructure of the network that we're in can deal with. It takes that incoming traffic and processes it, and I'll come on to how it processes it in a minute. And that traffic that it takes in, it also has an output mechanism into the ecosystem. Okay? So this system allows somebody, as they come onto their mobile phone, to effectively be identified. Okay? And by identification in this instance, what I mean is it links back to what we call a telco network ID. that sits behind the firewall and never goes anywhere. But that is the identifier that the telecommunications company uses to do your billing, to route your calls, to enable you to have a service from them.
Okay.
Okay? So in a lot of instances, that telco network ID can be a double hashed MISDN or something of that description. And that's what the telco generally uses for all of the services they provide to their customers. Right? It means that within their network, they have a series of identifiers for all of their subscribers. Yeah? And against those, they will hold all of your details, like your billing details, how much you spend, lots of your data points. It also means that they have the ability, with the consent from the consumer, to then hold profiles that can be used for service delivery against that same identifier. Okay? So that's the telco network ID. We reference that inside our system because that is our baseline ID that we use. But to stress, it stays behind the telco network. It doesn't go anywhere.
Right.
It's just used as a reference point to say, this is person A.
Right.
Okay? Or person B or person C.
Yeah.
Okay? So that's the first premise of the telco network ID. Our system then, when somebody comes online and they say, oh, this is person A, then we're able to deliver a signal out to the buy side. I'm going to put the buy side just down here for the purposes of, so this is the person that's going to receive the ad, for the purposes of the drawing. So they're able to deliver a signal out to the buy side, DSP, A, B or C, to say, okay, person A fits into segment B. Okay? They can do that through using the telco segmentation layer that's created based on the demand from the buyer.
Right.
Okay? So the whole journey is we have buy-side segment creation outside of the network through a UI that we make available to the ecosystem. That means that the DSP, the SSP, the advertiser can create their segment that they are looking to reach based on the attributes that are available from the telco.
What specific attributes are we talking about?
It depends on the telco, to be honest, and the consent profile that they have with their customers. But for example, in the Middle East and Turkey at the moment, we have attributes that range from age, gender, spend profiles, whether they're travellers, commuters, whether they're international travellers, what their international travel profile is, and lots of interest-based classifications for the services that they use.
So the telco then manages the consent, their side?
They manage the consent on the data usage.
Right.
Yes.
So in terms of like, I'm just going to stick with the privacy thing because it's quite interesting, right?
Yep.
If the user then decides that they want to opt out, does the telco offer them a way to do that or
yes.
or not?
So through all their services, and to make it really clear, we only use the telco network ID if there's an active consent for that telco network ID to be used. Okay. And we don't process any data, even behind the firewall, for customers that don't have consent for that data to be used.
Right. But
and that's absolutely key because we wouldn't touch it. We don't even get it delivered into our software behind the network for it to be processed.
So then you take specific attributes which then are sort of anonymized, and then you come up here and you'll have sort of your sort of
classifications
as person's X age or gender or lives in this area or postcode or whatever.
Yep.
The DSP then buys those segments, or the SSP buys those segments, or an ad network, or whoever buys the segments.
Doesn't really matter, actually. We can deliver across the board.
Then that's processed via the execution layer to deliver an ad to the user. Right. So the next question I have to ask is this a way to build? So obviously there's a lot of concern about tracking users across different sites, right? So across different domains. Is this domain specific, or are you able to sort of do this across different domains? So the user goes from Guardian to the Telegraph. I'm not even sure that's possible, but the Guardian to the FT. Are you able to identify the same person on those two URLs?
Effectively, we could, but we choose not to.
Okay, so you've gone down the privacy first route.
We've gone down the privacy first route
What
deliberately.
was the thinking behind that?
So the thinking behind that was that if I give my consent as a consumer for my data to be used, I'm giving it to be used based on the data holder and what they have, not where I'm going at that particular point in time.
Right.
Okay. Effectively, though, it doesn't mean that the segments can't be activated when I'm visiting different sites. It's
Right.
just that at the point of activation, I, as a Novatiq or the telco, don't know where they're being activated, if that makes sense.
Right, okay.
Okay, because they're activated in real time. So the other difference between us is not just that we offer telco network data as profiles, which are basically managed offline, by the way. They're not created in real time. The other difference with us is that they're then executed in real time. Because
That's what I'm saying, because if that person's on a, for instance, on the Guardian, right, it has to ping here or,
Yes.
or not here. It pings the wherever
it pings here.
It pings here first. Then you have to ping it out to your sort of UI here, and then it has to ping the DSP. This user is on this site right now by this impression.
Yeah, except it doesn't have to do that. We
Okay.
don't know the site that it's on. It's entirely anonymized because all we do is we trace our ID that we
I
generate.
see. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
So an ID called our Snowflake is generated on the publisher side.
Right.
So the publisher or the SSP creates an ID called a Snowflake.
Right.
If it's created by the publisher, it's lifted by the SSP into the bid request.
Right.
Okay? And then what happens is that Snowflake starts its merry journey down to the normal
Yeah.
ad ecosystem process.
Okay.
Okay? In parallel, the same piece of code that generates that ID that's run by the publisher and the SSP, and by the way, for them, they have to have consent at their side to generate that single identifier. So
Would that be through TCF, or do they have to have a sort of layer of
No, it's basically through TCF.
Okay.
They just have to, we're a
Right.
named partner,
Right, okay.
right? So they generate the ID for. And then effectively, what they do is they create a second request into the network. That becomes our request that we're able to do the mapping of. Okay? So that request for us only has an SSP link to it. We don't have publisher links to it. So
Right.
we don't know where people are coming from
Right.
because we don't need to. All we need to know is
the person.
we've got the Snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
We can map that to an ID in our infrastructure. We then, in real time, pre-bid, can deliver a response out to the buy side, whether it be an SSP or a DSP, or even directly to the publisher buy side, simply because we've got the consumer and all we're linking is the Snowflake.
Mm-hmm.
And we're sending them a response pre-bid. They then make the bid, or in their case, they put it into a deal ID to deliver through to the DSP, depending on where we're delivering it to. And whoever then wins that piece gets to deliver the creative back to the customer.
Interesting.
Okay,
So
so we don't need an identification
Right.
process because we generate our own ID.
Right.
And all we're doing is linking a 42-digit string for that one ad request to an ID that we hold behind the network, and we're sending out a response which says that 42-digit string maps to segment 678.
Okay. So it's bulletproof in terms of privacy.
Is bulletproof in terms of privacy, not least because even if DSP1 and DSP2 and DSP3 wanted the same segment, they'd all have different segment numbers against that same ID. And the ID only lasts for that ad request journey.
Okay, interesting.
So it's an evaporating ID.
So it can't be reused or...
Can't be reused.
So, okay, interesting. Is this more of a use case for mobile? I just feel like it's just tailor-made for mobile in many ways. I could be wrong, you could correct me here. But
Well, I mean, interestingly, no, it works across all platforms.
Right.
And actually, it works really nicely across broadband platforms and linking into connected TV.
Right.
Because, of course,
Interesting,
it,
yes.
it
of
doesn't
course.
it doesn't matter to us where the request is coming from. We work with all shapes of networks, and we can then, to a household, attribute breakdown user profiles that can then be delivered against Snowflake generation
Amazing.
at the point of use.
So it's just another really good segment to target ads against, and it's a sort of neutral ID as well, in the sense that it's not proprietary owned by a Roku or anywhere else. So you could actually use it, the buyer could actually use it there, or even an SSP could use it to enrich their own inventory.
Exactly, and that's what we do at the moment. So in the countries that we're working in, actually in all of them, we're delivering to SSPs directly for their own PMPs to enrich their inventory. We're also allowing them to use it for their direct buys, and we're integrated with DSPs that are actually using the token the other end, and we're running campaigns across all of the big suspects that you'd expect, like
Interesting.
The HSBCs and the Shells and the Nissans and the Hondas of this world.
So talk about your footprint, because you've had an interesting approach to building out the product and starting it in a particular market. So you started in MENA, in the Middle East. You've got quite a few clients there. So what about moving it into Europe then as a footprint? Where are you at with that? Or actually, just talk about your experience in the Middle East for us, how well it's gone, sort of in terms of adoption in the market, etc.
Yep. So it's going really well in the Middle East, and we started with the Middle East by virtue of the fact that we integrate with telcos, and so that's by far the most painful piece of working for Novatiq, right? Because that's the longest lead time, is the integration process with the telcos. And the Middle East, by definition, the telcos and Turkey as well, obviously, which is on the fringes, the telcos are slightly more nimble, a little bit more proactive, and they move a bit faster. And we wanted to demonstrate, for us, EMEA is our focus as a market. We're looking squarely at EMEA itself, but we needed to get to market in a time frame that demonstrated the benefits to the big players in Europe, because they like to see a working operational environment.
Yes, an MVP. Well, only an MVP, yeah.
Exactly. So we chose to go Turkey and Middle East first because they were faster, more nimble, got to market, so that we could then use that as a demonstration mechanism to take back to the larger telcos that we're obviously in conversation with in Europe. And in Turkey specifically, we are now 5-6 months into running the program with them, and it's going from strength to strength on a month-on-month basis with both the local infrastructure players, because there's a lot of differences in the Middle East. There's a lot more localization from publishers and from some of the SSPs and DSPs, and with the global players as well. We've seen some great successes, not least that we've been able to help the telcos themselves, because telcos spend a lot of money on marketing and advertising in every market. When they have their own identifier that enables them to realise they don't need to spend acquisition money on anyone that's got a snowflake because it's already one of their customers,
yes,
it saves them a fortune.
Oh, interesting. Interesting. And what about the UK then? Is the UK going to be your first market in Europe? I mean, outside of Turkey and the Middle
so
East?
we expect the UK to be online early part next year, Q1, and then swiftly followed by Spain and France.
Okay, very good. And in terms of adoption from the buy and sell side, are you seeing most of it sort of being programmatically executed, or how have you seen sort of the way it's being used?
So I think probably 70-30, 70% programmatic. But because of the fact that we work directly with SSPs and they still do quite a lot in the countries that we've referenced, Middle East and Turkey, they do a lot still of direct buys.
Okay.
I'd say about 30% of what we deliver are for the direct IOs that are coming through from the agencies to the mainframe SSPs, which tend to be the local ones. So Admatic, for example, in Turkey is a huge partner of ours. They're a bigger player in Turkey than Google, for example. So they're a massive partner of ours in the Turkey arena. And
for programmatic, but obviously it's going to be later in the year when you launch in the UK, but in terms of like integrations with different DSPs, are you already in there in terms of by this segment, or how is that going? Like, so if I open up a Trade Desk or a MediaMath or a DV360 or whatever flavor of DSP I'm using that week, are you integrated there or not?
So at this moment in time, we're integrated with a number of the smaller DSPs.
Okay.
We're in the process of integrating with the Trade Desk and Adform.
Okay.
So, and they are our primary targets for the markets that we're in at the moment. But we're already integrated with, we've got excellent partners with Platform 161.
Okay.
So they've been working with us from the very beginning. We're integrated with Scooter. I don't know if you know Scooter.
Yeah.
So we've got an integration, active integration with them. And then we've got quite a few direct integrations with the SSPs that are taking the data through the PMPs. Okay. And the next up should be Adform and Trade Desk.
Brilliant. Well, Tanya, thanks for coming in. Being our first post-COVID physical TraderTalk TV guest. Thank you very much, and thank you for that run through, because it's really interesting, because there's some really exciting companies doing some very interesting stuff around ID in the market, and Novatiq are one of those. And Tanya, thank you again.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for having us.
And hopefully we'll see you again soon with another physical TraderTalk TV, because we are doing virtual ones, but I like to get people in the whiteboard. So see you next time. Thank you.